My name is Arthur Burge of Crediton in Devon. Being a keen live steam enthusiast, I had been searching for quite some time for a steam engine which I could purchase and restore to new condition. Rumour had it that in a field in the heart of Devon there lay some derelict steam engines. This appeared to be the place, and as there was no sign of life, I decided to look around. Although there were plenty there, the one that took my eye was a roller made by John Fowler and Company of Leeds. The owner of the field had been keeping his eye on me and obviously thought I was going to attempt to steal one. However, I convinced him I was in dead earnest about buying one, and after a little haggling about its worth came to a price, and I became the proud owner of 12 tons of immobile iron. I had also committed most of my spare time for the next 2 years. The roller had been built in 1922 and had been lying derelict for the last 10 years. Obviously, the first thing to do was to take it, piece by piece as far as possible, to my garage at home, which I converted into a workshop for the purpose. And so began one of my many journeys to and fro. Luckily, I possessed a good metal turning lathe and electric welding and drilling equipment, so I was able to fabricate in my own workshop a lot of the parts which were so badly worn or rusted as not to be usable again. bought the roller in the spring of 1970, and the whole idea was to work as much as possible indoors during the inclement weather, so that in the summer months I could work on the roller out in the field, fitting such parts as I had rectified. Of the engine, which carries the spare coal and the water, was so badly rusted that it was impossible to repair it, and a friend of mine, Rodney Wheeler, agreed to help me prefabricate an entirely new tender in his workshop. The fabrication involved drilling, heating to white heat and putting into position 250 rivets through the quarter-inch steel plates of which the new tender was constructed, and the noise of the compressed air riveting hammer was shattering. Went by, with all my spare time spent in assisting, but finally it was completed and ready for hauling away for fitting into place. Working on the tender had delayed me a little with the other jobs, and there were still many parts to be brought to the workshop for further rectification. By early summer, the new tender had been placed and blocked roughly into position behind the boiler, ready for mounting once it had been painted. Some of the top fittings had by now been completed, and stage by stage I began to bolt them into position. The weather remained in my favor, and I was well satisfied with the progress I was making. Now it was midsummer, and the tender had been accurately clamped in position ready for drilling. As no electric power was available, all the holes required had to be made with a hand-operated drill. "28 holes in all had to be hand-drilled, and some of these are used for the bolts which clamp on the massive bronze bearings which carry the driving shaft to the road wheels. third shaft through its gear and into its bearing presented a bit of a problem, but an inclined plane, a lashing of wire, and a lot of energy took care of that. This is not a brake handle, but it controls the admission of steam to the cylinder. Pushing it forwards allows the roller to go forward, pulling it back reverses the machine. A spring-loaded bar holds the lever in the chosen position. These are the safety valves, which fit atop the cylinder block and have the very important job of releasing excessive steam pressure before it can cause a boiler explosion. This little piston of only 8 inches diameter and sliding with a 10-inch stroke inside the cylinder forms the entire motive power for the 12-ton steamroller. By August of 1970, most of the work on top had been completed, and my idea now was to get the machine mobile and steerable, so that I could get it towed to a covered standing which I had arranged for the winter months. it came to putting on the driving wheels, I had to enlist the aid of several friends, for the wheels weighed 2 tons each, and it also meant jacking up the rear of the engine to align the driving shafts. The driving wheels run loose on the shaft, but a removable heavy steel pin locks them into drive. Because there is no differential on a steamroller, when taking a very sharp corner, the pin on the inner wheel is removed to allow the engine to maneuver. Winter was fast approaching, and Mr. Borkwell came along with his traction engine to get my roller out of the field onto the road for towing away. Because of the softness of the field, the powerful winch on the traction engine was used to pull the roller a few yards at a time to the roadway. The winter months were spent, when time allowed, working on the engine, for I now had electric light and power, and by the spring of 1972, 16003 was beginning to look her old self again. It was midsummer, and whilst most people were relaxing and taking their holidays, I was getting ready for the first steam up of the roller. This meant, first of all, filling up the boiler with 120 gallons of water. Now was to come the crucial test. Would it blow up? If so, these will be my last words. Ah well, what a way to go. All went well, and I ran her gently for a time to smooth in the new bearings. Everything was going according to plan, and for the first time in 11 years, 16003 was moving under her own power. I had made a roof for the roller, and again I asked the help of friends to assist me in getting it into position. All that remained now was to call in the factory inspector to pressure test the boiler, after which I could lag and cover it prior to painting. After 21 months of spare time work, mostly on my own, my ambition was realized. 16003 was rolling again, and I had just a few weeks left to make any final adjustments before entering her for the carnival in October.